They said tips are for pretty girls. When I started, now I own the entire restaurant chain. What if the quiet sister, always overlooked and ridiculed, decided to stop letting others define her? Hey, my name is Jenny. I stood there, tray trembling in my hands, as the words cut through the din of the crowded restaurant. Tips are for pretty girls, sweetheart. The man's smirk was sharp enough to slice through my confidence. His buddies chuckling as they tossed a crumpled dollar onto the table. I was 19, my apron stained with coffee, my hair frizzing from the humidity of the kitchen. I forced a smile, the kind that hurt my cheeks, and walked away, their laughter trailing me like a shadow. But it wasn't just their words that stung, it was the way my sister, Sarah, sitting at the bar with her perfect ponytail and her manager's badge, laughed along with them. I never thought I would be betrayed by someone I loved, especially not in front of so many people. Sarah was supposed to be my safe harbor, the one who'd promised to look out for me when I took this job at the Rusty Anchor. She was the golden child, the one who always knew how to charm a room. While I, Jenny, was the quiet one, the one who tripped over her words and spilled drinks on her first day. I thought working here would bring us closer, that I'd finally step out of her shadow. Instead, that moment at table 12 became the first crack in my heart. A public humiliation that made me feel smaller than ever. As I cleared plates in the back, the clatter of dishes drowned out the chatter, but not the memory of Sarah's laugh. It wasn't just the customer's cruelty, it was the way she joined in, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. Amusement. Malice. I didn't know then how much deeper her betrayal went, how that moment was just the surface of a wound that had been festering for years. All I knew was the heat in my cheeks, the way my hands shook as I stacked plates, and the question that burned in my chest: why would she do that to me? I could have quit right then. Walked out, left the apron on the counter, and never looked back. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way I'd always been taught to keep going, to swallow the hurt and carry on. Or maybe it was the flicker of defiance that sparked in me as I stood there, feeling invisible. I realized I had a choice. I could let this moment define me, let their laughter and Sarah's betrayal shrink me into nothing. Or I could choose to change everything. I didn't know how it would unfold. But one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. That night, as I scrubbed the last of the dishes and watched Sarah count tips at the bar, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew I was done being the girl who took the hits. I just didn't know if I had the strength to fight back or what it would cost me to try. Will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? I used to think betrayal was a single, sharp moment like a knife you see coming. But it's not. It's 1,000 tiny cuts, each one so small you barely notice until you're bleeding out. That night at the Rusty Anchor, Sarah's laugh wasn't the first wound, just the one that made me look down and see the scars I'd been ignoring. As I walked home under the flickering streetlights, my sneakers scuffing against the cracked sidewalk, I started to unravel the moments that had quietly shaped me into someone who expected to be overlooked. Growing up, Sarah and I were a study in contrasts. She was the sun-bright, bold, always drawing people in. I was the shadow, trailing behind, content to bask in her glow. Our parents didn't help. "Jenny, why can't you be more like your sister?" they'd say, their voices soft with disappointment. I'd shrug, pretending it didn't hurt, but each comparison was a pebble in my shoe, a small pain I carried with every step. By the time I was a teenager, I'd learned to stay quiet, to avoid drawing attention to my plain face, my clumsy hands, my tendency to stutter when nervous. Sarah, meanwhile, sailed through life, collecting praise like tips in a jar. But there were moments, small, hidden betrayals that I'd buried so deep I almost forgot them. Like the time in high school when I worked up the courage to try out for the school play, only to hear Sarah tell her friends, "Jenny's sweet, but she's not exactly stage material." They laughed, and I pretended not to hear, but I dropped out of the audition the next day. Or the summer I saved up for a new dress, hoping to feel pretty for once, and Sarah borrowed it without asking, returning it stained and stretched, saying, "It looked better on me anyway." Each time, I swallowed the hurt, telling myself, it didn't matter. She was my sister. She didn't mean it. Now, at 19, those memories were flooding back, each one a weight pressing on my chest. I sat on my bed that night, the apartment silent except for the hum of the fridge, and let myself feel the ache. It wasn't just Sarah. It was the customers who ignored me unless I messed up. The coworkers who called me the quiet one like it was my whole personality, the way I'd started to believe I didn't deserve better. The rusty anchor had exposed it all, but Sarah's laugh had lit the match. What had I done to make her think it was okay to hurt me like that? And why had I let it go on for so long? I stared at the ceiling, my throat tight with unshed tears. Could I confront these hidden wounds, or would they stay buried forever? I wasn't sure I was ready to dig them up. But I knew one thing: ignoring them wasn't working anymore. I woke up the next morning with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that comes from carrying a truth you can't unsee. Sarah's laugh, the customer's sneers, the years of being the invisible sister, they weren't just moments anymore. They were a pattern, a script I'd been following without question. But lying in bed, staring at the water stain on my ceiling, I felt something shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic, not some movie montage moment of clarity. It was quiet, like the first ripple in a still pond. I was done being the girl who shrank herself to fit everyone else's story. I pulled on my jeans and a faded sweater, my hands moving with a purpose I didn't fully understand yet. The rusty anchor was opening in an hour, and I'd be there, same as always, balancing trays and dodging spills. But today felt different. I wasn't just going to work to survive another shift. I was going to start rewriting the script. I didn't know how, or what it would look like, but the decision to stop being passive settled into my bones like a promise. As I walked to the restaurant, the morning air sharp against my face, I thought about what it meant to take control. It wasn't about yelling at Sarah or quitting in a blaze of glory, though part of me wanted to. It was about refusing to let their words, their laughs, define me anymore. I'd spent so long believing I was less pretty, less capable, less deserving that I'd forgotten I could choose to see myself differently. But choosing was only the first step. The harder part was figuring out what came next. At the rusty anchor, I tied on my apron and moved through the motions, wiping tables, refilling ketchup bottles, smiling at customers who barely looked at me. Sarah was there, all charm and confidence, chatting with the regulars like she owned the place. I watched her, my stomach twisting, but I didn't look away. For the first time, I saw her not as the untouchable golden girl, but as someone who'd chosen to hurt me. That realization didn't erase the love I still felt for her. That was the worst part, but it gave me permission to stop waiting for her approval. By the end of my shift, my feet ached, but my mind was buzzing. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a question. What would my life look like if I stopped letting other people write it? Could I find the courage to change everything? Or would I hesitate when it mattered most? As I untied my apron and stepped into the evening chill, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. I just wasn't sure which path I'd take, or if I was brave enough to take it alone. The idea of revenge didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It crept in slowly, like a whisper I couldn't ignore, growing louder with every shift at the rusty anchor. I'd decided to take control of my life, but what did that mean in a place where I was still just the quiet one, invisible unless I spilled a drink? I started to see that taking control wasn't enough. I needed to reclaim the space I'd been denied, and that meant making sure Sarah, and everyone else who'd laughed, understood I wasn't invisible anymore. I began to plan, not with anger but with a quiet intensity that surprised even me. I'd always been the one who followed rules, who kept her head down, but now I was thinking like a strategist. The rusty anchor was more than a job, it was a microcosm of everything that had held me back. Sarah's promotion to manager, the way she basked in the spotlight while I scrubbed tables, wasn't just personal. It was a system, one that rewarded charm and overlooked effort. If I was going to rewrite my story, I needed to disrupt that system. I started small, observing everything. I noted how Sarah flirted with the owner, Mr. Callahan, to get the best shifts. I watched how the restaurant's profits hinged on a few key regulars, wealthy types who tipped big but demanded perfection. I studied the books when no one was looking, sneaking glances at the ledger in the back office. The rusty anchor was doing well, but it could do better. Callahan was lazy, coasting on outdated menus and a tired staff. There was opportunity here, if I could find a way to seize it. My plan took shape over weeks. I'd save every penny from my tips, meager as they were, and enroll in a night class on business management. I'd learn the restaurant's weaknesses, build a case to improve it, and present it to Callahan. If he wouldn't listen, I'd find another way. Maybe I'd pitch to one of those big tip regulars, someone with money to invest. The thought of outshining Sarah, of proving I was more than her shadow, fueled me. But it wasn't just about her. It was about every person who'd made me feel small, every laugh that had echoed in my ears, as I scribbled ideas in a notebook. Late at night, my heart raced with anticipation. This wasn't just revenge, it was a reckoning. But as the plan grew, so did a nagging doubt. Would outsmarting Sarah and taking over the rusty anchor fill the hole inside me? Will I feel victorious when it's over, or will the consequences leave me feeling empty? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the next step. The path was set. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something unexpected was waiting just out of sight. The night I decided to act. The rusty anchor was buzzing with its usual chaos, plates clinking, voices overlapping, the smell of fried onions thick in the air. My notebook, filled with months of careful planning, was tucked away in my bag, but its weight felt like it was strapped to my chest. I'd been preparing for this moment, rehearsing every word, every step. Tonight I wasn't just Jenny, the quiet waitress. I was someone with a plan. Someone ready to make them see me. I'd arranged a meeting with Mr. Callahan after closing, using the excuse of discussing staff concerns. He barely looked up from his whiskey when I approached him, but he agreed. Probably thinking I'd complain about schedules or tips. Instead, I'd spent weeks building my case, a detailed proposal to revamp the rusty anchor. New menu ideas, cost-cutting measures, a loyalty program for the big spenders. I'd even contacted one of the regulars, Mr. Hargrove, a retired investor, who'd always tipped me decently despite my fumbles. He'd agreed to hear me out if Callahan didn't bite. As the last customers left, I stood in the dimly lit office, my hands steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. Callahan slouched in his chair, looking bored. Sarah was there too, leaning against the desk, her arms crossed. A faint smirk on her face, like she thought I was about to embarrass myself. I took a breath and started, laying out my plan with a calm, I didn't feel. I pointed to the numbers, how we could increase profits by 20% with small changes. How the regulars wanted a fresher vibe. Callahan's eyebrows lifted slightly, but Sarah's smirk faded. You think you can do better than me? She interrupted, her voice sharp. You're a waitress, Jenny. Stick to what you're good at. I met her eyes, my voice steady. I'm good at seeing what this place could be. You're too busy playing queen to notice it's falling apart. The words felt like a release, years of silence breaking open. Callahan shifted, suddenly attentive. Sarah's face flushed, but I kept going, laying out every flaw in her management: missed orders, staff turnover, the outdated systems she ignored. The room was thick with tension when I finished. Callahan rubbed his chin, glancing between us. You've got guts, Jenny, he said finally. Let's try some of this. You're in charge of the changes. Sarah, you'll report to her for now. Sarah's jaw dropped, her eyes blazing with something darker than anger. I'd done it, taken the first step to upend her world. But as I left the office, her glare burning into my back, I wondered if this victory would feel as good as I'd hoped. Will I feel relieved after this, or will it leave me questioning everything? The high of that night in Callahan's office didn't last. I'd expected to feel triumphant, like I'd finally stepped out of Sarah's shadow and into my own light. Instead, as I walked home under a sky heavy with stars, my victory felt hollow, like biting into an apple only to find it rotten at the core. I'd taken control, flipped the script, and put Sarah in her place, so why did my chest ache with something heavier than relief? The next few weeks at the Rusty Anchor were a whirlwind. I threw myself into the changes. I'd propose new menus, streamlined ordering systems, a charm offensive with the regulars. The staff noticed the shift, some whispering their approval, others eyeing me warily, like I'd betrayed some unspoken code by challenging Sarah. She, meanwhile, was a storm cloud, her smiles tight and her words clipped. She followed my directions, but every yes, Jenny was laced with venom. I'd wanted her to see me, to respect me, but all I saw in her eyes was resentment and something deeper, something that looked like hurt. That hurt caught me off guard. I'd spent so long nursing my own wounds that I hadn't considered Sarah might have her own. Late at night, as I pored over receipts and schedules, I started to replay our history. The dress she'd ruined, the play she'd mocked me out of, those moments had cut me, but what had they meant to her? Was she lashing out because she felt threatened, or was it something else? The thought made my stomach twist. I'd planned my revenge to feel powerful, but now I wondered if I'd just built a new wall between us. The restaurant was thriving, profits were up. Customers were happier, but I wasn't. Every time I saw Sarah's stiff nod or caught her wiping her eyes in the break room, guilt gnawed at me. I'd wanted to prove I was more than the quiet sister, but had I just become someone who hurt others to feel big? I thought about confronting her, asking why she'd laughed that night, why she'd always pushed me down. But every time I got close, my throat closed up. What if her answer broke me all over again? Sitting in my apartment, my notebook open too, a page of half-finished ideas. I stared at the question I'd written weeks ago. Will I feel relieved after this, or will it leave me questioning everything? Revenge hadn't healed me. It had just stirred up the pain I'd tried to bury. I realized then that this wasn't about Sarah, not really. It was about me, about the girl who'd let herself believe she was less. Has revenge truly healed my wounds, or does something deeper need to be addressed? The rusty anchor was humming with new life, fresh paint on the walls, a menu that drew crowds, and a staff that, for the most part, looked at me with respect instead of pity. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd taken control, turned the restaurant around, and proved I was more than the girl who spilled coffee. But as I stood behind the counter, watching customers laugh over plates of food I'd helped design, I realized the victory wasn't what I'd expected. The power I'd chased didn't come from outshining Sarah or impressing Callahan. It came from something quieter, something I'd been building without even knowing it. A belief in myself. I started to see the past differently. For years, I'd carried the weight of Sarah's betrayals, the customers' taunts, my parents' comparisons. I'd thought revenge would erase that pain, but it only made me see it more clearly. The real battle wasn't with Sarah or the rusty anchor, it was with the voice in my head that had agreed with every cruel word. That voice was the one I needed to silence. And no amount of outsmarting my sister could do that for me. One evening, after a particularly busy shift, I found Sarah in the break room, her head in her hands. She didn't see me at first, and for a moment, I saw the sister I'd loved before the laughter, before the hurt. I could have walked away, let the silence between us grow, but something in me softened. "Sarah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "why did you laugh that night? When those guys humiliated me?" She looked up, her eyes red, and for the first time, I saw something raw in her expression. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I was scared you'd outshine me if I didn't keep you small." Her words hit like a punch, but they also cracked something open. Sarah wasn't the untouchable golden girl I'd made her out to be. She was human, flawed, carrying her own insecurities. We talked for hours that night, unraveling years of unspoken hurts. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start. That conversation shifted something in me. I didn't need Sarah's approval anymore, or anyone's. I'd built something real at the Rusty Anchor, not just a better restaurant, but a version of myself I could be proud of. I wasn't the quiet sister or the clumsy waitress. I was Jenny, and that was enough. Am I ready to move forward, or is there still something I need to let go of? For the first time, I felt the answer forming. I was ready. The past wasn't gone, but it no longer owned me. The Rusty Anchor felt different now. Not just because of the polished floors or the new menu boards glowing under soft lights, but because I felt different. I walked through the restaurant with a quiet confidence, no longer bracing for laughter or judgment. I'd spent years believing I needed to prove myself, to Sarah, to the customers, to the world. But standing in the middle of the dining room, watching families share meals and staff move with purpose, I realized I'd been proving myself to the wrong person all along. The only approval I needed was my own, and I finally had it. A few months after my talk with Sarah, I met Eden, a new hire with a sharp wit and a knack for reading people. She was older, maybe in her 40s, with laugh lines that told stories of her own battles. She'd been a single mom who'd clawed her way through tough jobs, and something about her steady presence made me trust her instantly. One slow afternoon, as we polished silverware, she asked me, "How'd you do it, Jenny? Turn this place around and still come out smiling?" I laughed, surprised, and told her the truth. I hadn't been smiling the whole time. I told her about the humiliations, the betrayals, the nights I'd doubted everything. She nodded, like she'd been there too, and said, "You didn't just change the restaurant. You changed your story. That's the real win." Eden's words stayed with me. She became my sounding board, someone who saw the Jenny I was becoming, not the one I'd been. With her encouragement, I took a leap I'd been too scared to consider before. I approached Mr. Hargrove, the investor regular, with a proposal to buy the Rusty Anchor. Callahan was ready to retire, and my track record spoke for itself. Hargrove didn't just agree, he offered to back me in expanding the business, turning one restaurant into a chain. It was terrifying, but I said yes, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to build something that was mine. Sarah and I weren't fully healed, but we were trying. She'd started therapy, and I was learning to forgive not just her, but myself, for all the years I'd let the hurt define me. The day I signed the papers to take over the rusty anchor, I stood outside, the keys in my hand, and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The girl who'd trembled under cruel words was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who'd turned pain into power, not through revenge, but through choosing herself. As I locked up that night, Eden at my side, the neon sign flickering above us, I looked out at the street where I'd once walked home in shame. Now, it was just a street, leading to a future I'd built. I was free not from the past, but from its hold on me. I was Jenny, and I was ready for whatever came next.